Russian President Vladimir Putin is facing an unexpected crisis. And this is a very domestic one. The very fighters that he had banked on to claim victories in Bakhmut and Donetsk have now turned against him. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the mercenary group Wagner, is mounting what is being described as a mutiny against the Kremlin. He has lashed out specifically at the Russian Defense Ministry for alleged excesses against the Wagner group. And as per reports, the Wagner group has already begun their mutiny by downing helicopters and planes of the Russian army after taking over a key air military base in the town of Rostov-on-Don in southern Russia. Now, reacting to this, the Russian President Vladimir Putin addressed the nation, accusing the Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin of armed treason. He referred to Prigozhin's dissent as a stab in the back.
Actions that split our unity are apostasy from our people, from our comrades in arms who are now fighting at the front. This is a stab in the back of our country and our people.
According to media reports, Putin in fact spoke to his Belarusian counterpart Lukashenko earlier in the morning, informing him about the situation in Russia. Now, these escalations have come after Yevgeny Prigozhin issued a video from inside of a building announcing that he had taken control of the army headquarters in Rostov-on-Don. And he further said that his troops are en route to Moscow, part of an attempt to take over. Now, this is the first insurrection that Russia is facing in decades since the Chechen War. Now, Prigozhin has said that the Russian president is in fact wrong to accuse him of treason. He's demanding for Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and the Chief of the General Army Staff, Gerasimov, to come and see him in Rostov-on-Don.
As for betraying the motherland, the president is deeply mistaken. We are patriots of our motherland. We have fought and we are fighting, everyone from Wagner PMC. And no one is going to turn themselves in at the behest of the president, the FSB or anyone else, because we don't want the country to continue to live in corruption, deceit and bureaucracy.
It's been evident for quite some time that Yevgeny Prigozhin is unhappy with Russia's defense leadership. But discontent has now evolved into the face of a mutiny. The Wagner chief has pledged to oust the leadership of the defense ministry in Moscow, particularly Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and the Chief of the General Staff, Gerasimov. The Prigozhin claims that the Russian military had killed a huge number of Wagner fighters in an airstrike. The Prigozhin has previously slammed Russia's military leadership for failures in the war in Ukraine and is known for his long-running feud with the defense ministry. He has claimed full credit for capturing Donetsk region, the salt mining town of Soledar, and also several parts of the war, especially in Bakhmut, where the Wagner mercenaries had, of course, played a major role. And after Prigozhin's call to oust the Russian defense leadership, authorities have put in place tighter security measures in Moscow. Amidst growing concerns about the risk of an attack on the capital, Russia's security officials have now introduced roadblocks across Moscow, something which is being reported as Kremlin's fortress plan. Now, the plan is rarely used and is intended to repel an attack on the security force installations in Moscow. The Russian media claims that it implies an emergency gathering of law enforcement personnel and taking control of especially important objects of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Federal Security Service or the Federal Penitentiary Service. The plan also provides for blockading the building of law enforcement agencies and the readiness by the forces on duty to repel an external attack. And this has led to panic among some of Moscow's residents, whereas others have said that they had confidence in Putin and the Kremlin.
You can see military hardware heading out onto the streets. They scrambled everyone, but our guys are working normally. I think they're primarily protecting our people. But it's frightening. Of course, you sit at home thinking about what might happen. It's disturbing both for you and your loved ones.
Meanwhile, in Kiev, President Zelensky in fact took to Twitter saying that for a long time Russia had used propaganda to mask its weakness and the stupidity of its government. And now there is so much chaos that no lie can hide it. The Ukrainian intelligence services said that the confrontation between the Wagner chief and the military leadership is a signal that Putin's regime is collapsing. And also to give us more insights in terms of what is in fact unfolding in Russia at this moment, we are being joined by Sergei Samleny, who's a defense expert and also a director at the European Resilience Initiative Center in Berlin. Mr. Samleny, thank you very much indeed for joining us here in WION. Now, let me in fact begin by asking you, with these pretty dramatic developments that have taken place where the Wagner chief, it appears, is staging an open mutiny against the Russian military leadership. But the question that needs to be asked is, even though Yevgeny Prigozhin has gone on record and has said that he's not trying to stage a military coup, but in terms of what his actions are and in terms of how his mercenaries are being moved, it does appear to be a mutiny.
For having invited me today. It is indeed amazing, stunning events which are happening in Russia, and clearly the Russian political leadership and the Russian nation now harvests the violence they sowed for years, and they're about to taste their own medicine. Well, both sides accuse each other in mutiny and betrayal. If you listen to the statements by Prigozhin, he says that the Minister of Defense betrayed their own soldiers and even shelled them. And the Russian Minister of Defense says that Prigozhin has betrayed his military oath. And here we need to say that it was created by the Ministry of Defense pretty deliberately, the situation when the Wagner groups are not a part of the military.
Right.
From this perspective, they cannot organize any mutiny, any rebellion, because they're not military personnel. They have not served in the army. They have not give oath. So this is legally is of course it is not interesting for analysis. How does it look from the point of view of the legal perspective? But what is interesting, the velocity, the speed with which Wagner Group gathered control over Rostov, over Voronezh, and now heading to Moscow. The level of violence which Wagner Group provided against the Russian army, they have already shot down at least 3 Russian helicopters and at least 2 Russian planes, one fighter jet and 1 transport plane. So this is the group which was created by the Russian Ministry of Defense in order to escape any responsibility for the actions of these mercenaries, which were de facto under control of the army. And they have armed them with all possible equipment, including anti-air systems, including jets, including tanks, including infantry fighting vehicles. And now this mass of the people are moving to Moscow, which is already the development which Russia has not seen since over 100 years.
Absolutely.
There were some insurgencies on the ethnic-dominated suburbs of the empire, but never in the Russia-dominated center of the empire. So this is a pretty new development. I personally believe that Prigozhin could not organize something like that on his own. Of course, he is a skilled manipulator and a good organizer, and he is totally respected by his army and his troops. But he couldn't organize that sort of that full-scale invasion de facto of Russia without being backed by at least some FSB guys or military guys. He also took control over the headquarters of Russian Southern Military District in Rostov.
Mr. Samleny, if I can just interrupt there. Now, all of this is according to estimates. It's being said that at this moment, Yevgeny Prigozhin, at his command, has got about 25,000 Wagner mercenaries. That is the number of soldiers or fighters or mercenaries, whichever way you want to describe them. Now, how much of a challenge can he actually pose to the professional Russian army? Because quite clearly what is happening at this moment, it does appear, is that at least a part of those Wagner mercenaries are marching towards Moscow. How do you think this will play out?
Well, I would say that the biggest power of Prigozhin is not the number of his troops. Even if he has first 25,000 are not all skilled fighters. There are a lot of freshly mobilized inmates. They are not very good soldiers. But and of course the Russian army has much bigger capacities to attack these columns, with all the strategic aviation bombing, with missiles, with rocket artillery. The Russian army, if wanted, they could destroy this column of Wagner troops. The question is different. The question is if the Russian army is ready to fulfill this order.
Right.
If the Russian army is ready to kill Wagnerites. We have seen that the Wagnerites have seized control over Rostov-on-Don, a huge city in the south of Russia, and the headquarters of the Russian military command in the south within a couple of hours.
Absolutely.
They have took control of a Milerovo air base. They have took control of a Voronezh air base, Voronezh military base.
Correct.
They're moving to Moscow now without actually facing any resistance. And this is maybe because the Russian army is not so willing to attack Wagnerites.
All right, very interesting. Just
trust...
hold your thought there, Mr. Samlin, because I'm told that we're also being joined by Dr. Sergei Markov, who is in fact the former spokesperson for President Vladimir Putin and also a former member of the Russian Parliament and the director of the Institute of Political Studies. Sir, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. And let me in fact ask you this. What we are witnessing is something that is so dramatic that probably no one would have expected that Yevgeny Prigozhin, a man who was said to be so close to Vladimir Putin, would be staging a mutiny against his boss. What is happening at this moment in Moscow?
Nothing happened seriously in Moscow, except few things. We have finishing of the schools, and today should be so-called last ring for the school children. It's have been postponed for 1 week, and also tomorrow I was planning to go to the yoga festival. It's also have been postponed.
All right. But tell us about what is Yevgeny Prigozhin up to, because quite clearly the Wagner mercenaries have captured the city of Rostov-on-Don. They've also taken control of the military facilities of Voronezh. Now, this is something that Vladimir Putin would not have expected, because quite clearly this is a mutiny where a big chunk of his fighting force is fighting against Russia now.
I wouldn't say that Vladimir Putin fully didn't expect it. Of course, Yevgeny Prigozhin, Vladimir Putin has a friendly relationship during many years. And that's why Vladimir Putin believes that about loyalty of Yevgeny Prigozhin. But, I know Yevgeny Prigozhin a little bit and through the common friends and so on. He's very extraditionally emotional guy. He can make decisions based on emotion. Of course, it's difficult to imagine that he's also a big businessman, but sometimes it's cruel and very emotional and conflicting, very much conflicting. And it looked like that Vladimir Putin understood that that independence of Wagner Group and personally Yevgeny Prigozhin too big. That's why Vladimir Putin issued special decree that all soldiers of Wagner Group should sign special documents of loyalty with Russian Defense Ministry up to the July 1st. It means in 2 days from now.
Dr. Markov, you've been a spokesperson, a former spokesperson for Vladimir Putin. Try help us understand, how Vladimir Putin would view this. Because quite clearly, he has come forth and issued a public statement. He appeared on state media earlier this morning. He described what Yevgeny Prigozhin has done is a clear case of treason, for which harsh measures will be taken. Those are the exact words of Vladimir Putin. So how would Vladimir Putin be looking at an act of this open mutiny against him?
Kremlin now has not so much military strategy to fight against Wagner Group. But now main fighting for the souls of Russian soldiers who is part of this Wagner Group. Because they have loyalty to the Vladimir Putin as to president, and they have loyalty to Yevgeny Prigozhin as the chief and godfather. And Vladimir Putin issued special appeal to the people, ask them, please remember that you are first of all Russian soldiers. Also, two generals who help Yevgeny Prigozhin very much from the top to create this Wagner Group from the beginning. They also made special appeal last night to the soldiers of Wagner Group. So now it's very important period for this battle inside souls of these Russian soldiers who is member of Russian group. We don't know result of this, but on the full dependence of this result of this fighting battle in Seoul, it will be then all actors will build their strategy, military and political strategy. But now it's most important goal of Putin appeal.
All right, very interesting. Now, Dr. Markov, you've been a spokesperson of Vladimir Putin, so you'd know how would look at this kind of what one would only say is open mutiny against the Russian army. Now, what is interesting also is that Yevgeny Prigozhin, you mentioned, is a very emotional guy. He's also been a former chef of Vladimir Putin. So the two of them know each other really well. But at this moment, does this effectively mean, with what Yevgeny Prigozhin has done, does this now mean that Yevgeny Prigozhin's position within the Russian military architecture is no longer tenable, that the Wagner mercenary group will not be able to operate along with the Russians as things stand at this moment?
Not for sure. Now it's quite, if Wagner Group soldiers will keep loyalty to Yevgeny Prigozhin, it will be very difficult for a Russian army to crush it from by military means, because Wagner Group is one of the most effective army globally in the world. And they have a very big experience in the fighting of the Ukrainian front. And also what Moscow will do, will take army, something about 50,000 people from Ukrainian front, but it will open the window for the offensive of Ukrainian army. So it's very difficult. And also Voronezh and Rostov, they're big cities, almost 1 million people. It's very difficult to fight for them. So possibly some negotiation will start, and conditions for the compromise will be produced.
All right, very interesting. You feel that some negotiations will in fact start. Thank you very much indeed to Dr. Sergei Markov and also to Mr. Samnelny for in fact having joined this broadcast. This is an unprecedented move, something that probably Russia has not witnessed in decades, where at this moment we're given to understand that the Wagner mercenaries are marching towards Moscow. The situation is extremely, extremely delicate. It's difficult to predict as to what happens. But Dr. Sergei Markov, who's been a former spokesperson of President Vladimir Putin, feels that some negotiations is the only way forward in which this crisis in Russia will have to be resolved. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.